This is what happens when a Christian watches too much Ancient Aliens. You get Billy Carson.
Is Jesus part alien?
I believe so. Not only was Jesus's mom a virgin birth, but his grandmother was also a virgin birth. Didn't hear about that in Sunday school. One of the earliest versions is the Ethiopian Bible and the Sinai Bible.
Okay.
Moses never crossed the Red Sea. He crossed the Sea of Reeds. Also, another mistranslation is the God. God is not supposed to be singular in the Bible. It's plural in all cases. Gods with an S. The Lord's Prayer, that's Enki's prayer. That's Ptah's prayer, who's also known as Enki. Enki.
In which religion?
In Christianity.
Enki is in Christianity.
No, he's ancient Sumerian.
That's okay. That's Sumerian. And
yeah.
who? And
he's an Anunnaki. So you're praying to him. Jesus was crucified.
Whoa.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
What happens?
It doesn't exist in the book of Barnabas.
Jesus' wife is the Mary Magdalene?
Yeah. Which means he probably had kids, and his Merovingian bloodline is still probably walking the land till this very day. And in the Gospel of the Holy 12, he shows up in Egypt, and he was in Egypt. What did he go there for? To learn the Egyptian mysteries. And then he leaves there, and he goes to Tibet to learn Qigong and Reiki healing, which was confirmed by the Dalai Lama. And then he heads down into India to learn the mystic arts, teaching reincarnation all the way back. You happen to stumble into one of the world's foremost experts on biblical texts, the Torah, the ancient tablets in the world. That's who you're talking to right now. Do you understand that the Bible was not written by any of the disciples? This religion has got to come to an end because it's a farce.
It's all good to say all these outlandish things when you're not getting any pushback. But what happens when you come across someone who knows what they're talking about? Let's say a biblical historian, for instance. Well, that's precisely what happened. And this is the moment where everything went south for Billy Carson. Or should I say, it all went west.
Wesley Huff, historian, linguist, biblical scholar, PhD, and athlete wannabe. Billy, you talk about how Jesus was never crucified.
They say, well, Jesus was crucified.
Whoa.
Well, that doesn't exist in the Sinai Bible.
What happens?
It doesn't exist in the book of Barnabas. They didn't kill him. In Harvard Library, there is a book of Jesus' wife at the Harvard Seminary School. And they found that about 8 years ago.
Jesus' wife is the Mary Magdalene?
Yeah.
So she was not actually...
They're assuming it's Mary Magdalene. It doesn't specifically say, but we're assumed that it is, which means he probably had kids, and his Merovingian bloodline is still probably walking the land till this very day.
I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay. The only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just a it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD, and its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified, and that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently.
I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay, yeah, well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are 2 manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery. And so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have 2 copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish. we see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian, and I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John. And it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys, I'm just
I can actually.
smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
So I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Alland categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. Mm-hmm. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels and Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that.
I think in his mind, he's like, okay, I might have got this stuff wrong, but there's so much other stuff that I talk about that is way more important. And I think what he fails to realize in that is that if he's this wrong on this, it just casts a complete shadow on everything else he's talked about. Because if he cannot get any facts, I'm not talking about
basics.
I have never heard him say something accurate about church history, the Bible, Christianity. I honestly haven't, and I'm not being hyperbolic there. I had a list of things that I wanted to talk to Billy about because he just does not get anything right. And so if all of those things are wrong, of course it compromises his whole thing about, aliens, Anunnaki, ancient history, all of that stuff.
So that's the New Testament account debunked by Wes Huff, talking about Jesus not being crucified, and secondly, Jesus having a wife and kids, proving that the Sinai Bible is in fact an inaccurate source and that the Book of Barnabas is a forgery. Therefore, Billy Carson don't really have anything to rely on, and all his ridiculous claims falls flat on his face. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning, comparing the Babylonian accounts of creation from the Sumerians and the biblical accounts to refute Billy's claims that the biblical story of Genesis was directly taken out of the Babylonian mythology of the Anunnakis, referencing his claims from the Enuma Elish.
So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly, from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 tablets of creation is a lot of the in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously it's a smaller Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the seven tablets of creation. The Epic of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code of Hammurabi and a few others have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text. Meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe that. But a lot of this information is just copied from older tablets and texts from an earlier date. That's what I found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Yeah, have you read the Enuma Elish?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enuma Elish for us?
Sure. The Enuma Elish is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal, and the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time that this, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there's talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and text. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited supposedly a brown dwarf, basing on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the Enuma Elish also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the Epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argue that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities. on Earth and according to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here, they would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I sat down with a Syriologist friend and we walked through it a couple of years ago. So I think that there are components of what you said that I would say are in there. I'm not sure it's the best summary. Nonetheless, okay, going with what you said that there were like verbatim parallels with the biblical creation story. Even just going off of what you said, which I think there are components of that I would agree with, the Battle of the Gods, the concept of Enki and the younger gods, and they fight Tiamat, and then Marduk, who swears he'll defeat Tiamat, and Kwenku, who kills Tiamat by shooting her with an arrow, and there's this big battle, and then the gods that die end up being the earth and the sky and even us, because we are the end result of that battle. I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there?
Separated the waters from the waters, for example. That's in the Enuma Elish, and that's also in the biblical text. Okay,
that I would agree is a parallel. The only reason I highlight that is that if you're making this the argument, because if you brought it up, and I mean this with all due respect, there are superficial parallels. I would agree. The separation of the water, the concept of the earth being formless and void. That's also in the Enuma Elish. However, I think all the other details, it's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, you don't have a creation within 7 days.
I'm not going to take the Enuma Elish and put it into the biblical text. There are certain words that they utilize that let me know that they copied it from that text. Like, for example,
so what words?
Separating the water from the waters, the void, the earth being void. That information is literally just copied over. So it tells you that somebody saw that and said, let me add it to this book right here. Or let me add it to the scripture or this papyrus, because it wasn't a book yet at that time.
So was this text discovered that makes it parallel to Genesis? Was this like supposedly discovered prior to I'm just curious.
It wasn't discovered prior to the Bible, but it dates back long before the Bible was ever written.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so let me just say this. So the reason why I say it's actually an apologetic against that is because the purpose of the Enuma Elish, which the Babylonians read every Babylonian New Year, was to point out the fact that the deities, and there's countless deities in the Babylonian pantheon, they actually come from the created order. So they're not outside of time and space. They actually come from the created order. And when they die in this battle, right, when Tiamat is defeated, the defeated gods become the earth and the sky and the plants and even you and me. And in that sense, the theme is that you don't actually have any purpose or end result, and you're not created in the image of God. In fact, in the ancient Babylonian system, only the kings were created in the image of God. And what we see that is counter to that is that even, sure, there's superficial, divided the waters, but we find that in almost every society and culture. That's not a parallel as much as it's just a generality. I would say what we see within the biblical account is that God purposefully creates. There's only one God. He purposefully creates, and then he creates, and it's good. And it continues to say it's good 7 times. And then at the end of chapter 1, just for the thick people in the original audience, it says, and then it was very good. And then he creates humanity, not kings, but simply the humans that he creates in God's image. And they have purpose and meaning, and that instills them with this creation order. And that's not what we find in the Enuma Elish. In fact, we find the opposite in the Enuma Elish, is that the created order is not good, it's a mistake, and that you are not created in the image of God. And there's a reminder that regular people are not created in the image of God. So linguistically, Hebrew does have Semitic ties with Akkadian. Doesn't with Sumerian. Sumerian is a language isolate, a glutenizing language. But I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything. In the sense of, I'm in an office studio, you're in your office studio. That doesn't mean that that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I just see if I have all these texts out, there's a lot of different information that you can see. There's a lot of it's been copied word for word into the biblical text.
The creation story according to Babylonian mythology.
Marduk then built the heavens and the earth from Tiamat's corpse. He bound the 11 monsters to his feet as a trophy. Tiamat's champion would be charged with treason, because there's a justice system now, and they would execute him. But from his blood, they would create humans, both to serve the gods and assist them in keeping order in the world. That way, Tiamat's chaos and destruction could never threaten anyone again.
The biblical accounts of the creation story.
The book begins with God taking the disorder and the darkness described in the second sentence of the Bible, and God brings out of it order and beauty and goodness. He makes a world where life can flourish. And God makes these creatures called humans, or Adam in Hebrew. He makes them in his image, which has to do with their role and purpose in God's world. So the humans are made to be reflections of God's character out into the world, and they're appointed as God's representatives to rule his world on his behalf, which in context means to harness all of its potential, to care for it, and make it a place where even more life can flourish. God blesses the humans. It's a key word in this book. And he gives them a garden. It's like a place from which they begin starting to build this new world.
I don't know about you, but I know who my creator is. The difference between the two is that one was created to be slaves and one was created equally in the image of God to become beautiful. So what do you want your story to be? Really, the accounts of creation from the Enuma Elish is that humans were created to be slaves by their gods. Whereas in the Christian biblical text from the Genesis accounts, it says that all men were created equal in the image of God, and that we were beautiful and that we were good. Just because you found a word or two or even a phrase that is the same doesn't mean it's the same narrative of the story. It's like this. Just because you find a ball in a football pitch, the same way you find a ball in a basketball court, doesn't mean it's going to be the same game. You have to analyze everything carefully and stay and watch and witness the story unfold and listen to it, because you'll find out that that's a completely different narrative, different story, different people, different characters. So to everyone watching this, I implore you to do your own research and to find out things, because the truth is a long road that you must constantly seek and walk upon. It's not something that's going to be given to you straight away. And in your pursuit of the truth, don't just cling on to things just because they're novel or they're quite exciting. You must do your own research, do your due diligence to find out if it's truly what it says it is or not. Don't be emotional about things. Don't look at it in one perspective. You must look at it like an artist's perspective. You have to go around everything, up, down, side to side, front and back. You must inspect everything in order to find the truth out of something. And then to the last point, they go on to talk about what is God's pronouns. Is he a he, a she, or whatever you might call him? And this is what Wes had to say about that.
In your version of what you believe in, you keep saying that God's a he.
Yep.
And so where do you get that from?
Throughout both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament, you have the masculine singular pronoun used for God.
And why is God a man? Where's the evidence of this?
Well, God isn't a man. See, within historical Christianity, we don't believe that God has a gender. However, the way that he has decided to reveal himself is through the masculine plural, and then ultimately by becoming a human in the person of Jesus Christ. So we don't believe that God has a gender. In fact, the fact that God creates humanity in his image and he creates them male and female, those are two aspects of the image of God. And so that's the completeness. So historical Christianity has never argued that God is gendered. Jesus is gendered in the sense that during the incarnation, he becomes a human man, but he's still fully man and fully God. But God is spirit. And right, as the scripture says, we worship him in spirit and in truth. But nobody's arguing that. What's that? Sorry?
That always blows my mind.
God is the same all the time, right? He's always good. God is all the same all the time. Right?
Yeah, but we do see that in Scripture, God has revealed himself through the masculine plural. And there are aspects of God's character that we see within Scripture that do actually communicate. Jesus says that he longs to gather Israel like a mother hen collects her chicks. So we see aspects of, the feminine of God, not meaning that God is feminine, but that the image of God reflects both the masculine and the feminine. And that's why when the two become one flesh, there's a uniting of that reflects the image of God as well within the covenant of marriage.
Do you actually believe that the majority of Christians really believe that God is not masculine, that God has both aspects?
I mean, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe.
How many would tell you, that God's not a man? They've never been taught this.
Well, I was taught it growing up. I was taught it in when I was a child, when I went to seminary, when I went to Bible college. I was taught it in graduate school. I would say I would say a few things to that. I would say in one sense, it's irrelevant what the majority of Christians believe, because what historical biblical Christianity articulates is what they should believe. There are Christians who run around saying all sorts of things that are not in conformity to biblical, historical, Orthodox Christianity. And they shouldn't believe that because it's irrelevant. And so if one Christian believes something that is not in line with biblical Christianity, I mean, that's on them. So God is not gendered, but he does express through inspired scripture the masculine the masculine pronoun. So what I really wanted to do, and we didn't get to in this debate, was I simply wanted to ask Billy, Billy, you've made a number of very overt statements about biblical Hebrew, biblical Greek. What would you say your competency level in those languages is from a scale of 1 to 10? And simply ask him, how good do you think you are in understanding, reading, translating these languages? And on that basis, if he says, well, I really don't know very much about it, I would say, then you probably shouldn't be talking about it, because people who don't know things about languages in general shouldn't be making definitive statements about what those languages mean. And if he said, I do have competency, then I would have dug into some of these things and said, okay, you have made this statement about Elohim. Can you explain to everybody what something like how the plural eam operates in Hebrew syntax. Do you mind explaining to everybody who's listening what a concretized abstract plural is? You know, these are questions that I would want Billy to explain, to reveal to those who are listening that Billy doesn't know any of these things, because Billy doesn't know biblical Greek or Hebrew. I was going to try to do the same thing with when he makes overt statements about knowing Sumerian. He told Joe Rogan he can read Sumerian. I know a number of ancient dead languages. I have tried my hardest to wrap my head around Sumerian, and I cannot do it, because at minimum, there are other ancient Near Eastern languages. There's Akkadian, there's Elamite, that have kind of links to Afro-Semitic other languages like Aramaic and Hebrew, or Amharic or Ge'ez, but there is no linguistic connection with Sumerian to anything else. This is a really, really hard language. And so to go on Joe Rogan and say, well, I can read this stuff, you can't. I can't. You can't. And so, but that's what I wanted to ask, because he takes that and then he sets himself up as the expert to then say the Bible was copied from Sumerian texts. I know because I can read Sumerian tablets. It's nonsense.
And that's it. Thank you so much for watching these guys. And to everyone that is viewing this, whatever religion you may come from, whatever point of view you may come from, there's only one thing that you must do: that do your own research in your path to the truth. Seek it diligently and persistently. Don't just settle for one truth and then live your whole life from that. You have to constantly wrestle with these ideas, and you must constantly pit them against each other to find out what is truly the truth. And you must live your life as such, constantly learning about different things. You must be honest with yourself. Be critical about things. Don't just accept them for what they are in any field and any aspect. This is another episode of The Third Eye. Thank you for watching, guys.